I think we're going to conclude our study of idols tonight, at least the idol worship from the nation of Israel. I think we've beat that one to death. One of the questions that came to my mind as I was preparing for this lesson, what was it about idolatry that caused them to move into idolatry? I was reading something a few weeks ago. Now, whether it was legit or not, I have no idea. It could have been totally made up. But one of the things that we know just from common sense is that some people have a propensity for certain things because of our personality. There are some who are more easily persuaded. There are some who are much more gullible, and they're much more easily persuaded. I know some folks that you could tell them almost anything, they'd say, "Really?" No, it's like, okay, they're gullible. They're just that they have that propensity to be taken by a scam because of their personality. So the idea was that people have this propensity for certain things, and I think there was one of those that was addiction. Certain people, because of their personalities, are more easily addicted to things. Why did the Israelites move into idolatry? And why did they want it so badly? Why did they stay there? Why did they just totally give themselves over to idolatry continually? And it wasn't just one generation, it was every generation at one time or another, it seems, because even when Joshua is leading the children of Israel, there's this movement into idolatry. And you have the next scene is the nation almost being totally consumed by idolatry as soon as Joshua and the elders are gone from that generation. So I ask you the question, why do you think that Israel was so persuaded to move into idolatry? Why did they go into idolatry so often, so much, so deep? Why did they do that? Any ideas? Okay.
But I think the main reason was it's the same reason we have today. When you look at those religions really weren't about worshiping a God, it was about pleasing themselves. We see the same thing today.
Okay, yeah. Ryan says that one of the reasons, possibly from his point of view, is that they wanted to be like those around them. And also because it was attractive, because it wasn't as much about worshiping a God as it was letting yourself go and being pleased by yourself. Yes? Okay, so the statement that is made, every man did what was right in his own eyes, the very concept of me being able to just follow my own whims and wishes is more attractive than following the God. Yeah, good observation.
I think they were jealous.
Jealous?
They were jealous of the people that they were, because this was a land that flows and milk and honey.
Okay.
Before they got there, and they saw all that, and they said, well, we want some of that too, but how did they get it?
Okay. All right, so they looked around them and they saw the prosperity and the way that things had gone for those inhabitants of the land, and maybe they thought 1 + 1 is 2. That is, they worship Baal, they worship the false gods, and they've been blessed, and they forgot that God prepared them that land to give to them. Okay. Yeah.
Well, in those gods you could see, they were physical.
Okay.
And our God is invisible.
Okay. So, yeah, one of the things that may have been very attractive for them was there was this ability to actually see and touch and be have some kind of relationship with something that was physical. Yeah, that's good. Any other ideas why they were drawn to idolatry? I looked for scriptures, and I really didn't find anything. I know that they were accused a lot by God of being faithless, and they were accused of not being devoted to God, and yet there's really nothing that you could just kind of pinpoint that I found. There may be something that I just overlooked or didn't see that could actually pinpoint to say, because of this, you've moved off into idolatry, but didn't see some of that. Anything else?
Unless it's really just the same pattern as to why Adam and Eve partook of the fruit in the garden in the first place, which is being deceived, and then Adam just following after, which kind of goes back to what was already said, which is the desire to be your own God, and because the twist was you'll be like God. Then we did an evil, of course it was played around a little bit, change wording and stuff, but unless the nation of Israel followed that same pattern, and you can look at scriptures that talk about that and parallel, my best guess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, good thoughts. What Gary says is that you have, it seems, the same thing going on, which is God gives us the rules, God lays it down for us, and just like Adam and Eve made the choice and were deceived, made the choice, and one of the draws of it all is that we have to remember that all of this is Satan's tool. Just like you mentioned, Satan came in the form of this serpent, did all of his work through that. Well, he just uses different forms now. It's going to be this idol, or it's going to be this draw that is pleasing to the eye and is so magnificently sculptured. I don't mean the idol itself, but the idea of idolatry is so magnificently constructed so that it is just so appealing. You just can't, it's appealing. Yeah.
Well, some scholars reference, this is a whole can of worms, why not? I mean, some scholars reference the idea that demons or spirits may have been behind some of these gods. And so there may have been even more of a direct, not influence, but Satan at work in a kind of way that's not permitted anymore due to the miraculous.
Yeah. You're right, that does open up a whole can of worms. What Gary mentions is that there are some who suggest that there may have been demonic forces behind a lot of these, especially the idea of Baal. The very concept there seems to be a little bit fluid, because most every pagan nation would serve some form, and they might even call it Baal. As a matter of fact, from what I understand, maybe some of the original languages of some of those, like the Phoenicians and some of those others, that word simply meant God or some kind of God that they would worship. So the very idea of there being this option out there and this opportunity very well could be backed by these by demons, but obviously it is Satan at work, whether there's actually demons behind it or not.
Well, the whole history of the Israelites, I mean, always that's what they've done. They just jumped back and forth. And what they would do is God would do things for them. They'd have to conquer the land or whatever, and they were all in. I mean, they worship God. And then your next generation comes along, and they don't remember those times when all this had to take place. And so they then began to go with the people surround them and say, well, why should we do all these things that this God wanted us to do? Because we've never seen him do anything for us. So let's just go the easy way, which is not an easy way. If you look at Molech and all these others, they were terrible gods.
Oh, yes.
I mean, sacrifice your children, do all that, and they jump into that even.
Mm-hmm.
But then they get captured as things happen, and they go, oh, will our God come back? Yeah, they said he would, and then your generation would come back to him again.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly the cycle that we're looking at as we have gone through this over the last several weeks about the cycle that there just seems to be no end to.
It's like our children.
Right.
We keep going through those same cycles.
Right. Yeah. Listen to me because I have been there. I made those mistakes. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Mom's an idiot and dad's a dummy. Why not?
Well, I was gonna say, it's hard to say, you know, that maybe they wouldn't have done this if they'd done what God told them to begin with, the temptation wouldn't have been there.
Right. Yeah.
If they had wiped them out like he told them to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you have not only the struggle with them being neighbors, but you have the intermarrying and the combination that it just seems to be, oh, God said don't do this because this is a very significant reason, but hey, God doesn't know what he's talking about. We're going to do it anyway. I'm going to marry a Phoenician, and we're going to insert those gods into our family. What's the big deal? All right, any others? Why do you think the Israelites were so drawn to idolatry? Why did they go back all the time? I'll give you my list. It's much like what you already said. As a matter of fact, number one was everybody's doing it. All of our neighbors are doing it. When we look around us, our neighbors are, and by the way, what you said was we're looking around and our neighbors are prospering and they're worshiping the Baal. So why can't we worship God? And just in case Baal has anything going for him, so that he can be the one who makes our ground fertile and helps our crops grow, we can just kind of include him a little bit. Keeping up with the Joneses? Yeah. Keeping up with the Canaanites and all those, yeah. Another thing that I wrote down was that when this one's already been said too, the idea of being confined by a God who says these things are right and these things are wrong, and you can't engage in certain things, but you look around you and everybody around you is engaging in these sexual orgies and all kinds of exploitation sexually. Drunkenness and all those things are going on, and so they look around, and one of the things that's very appealing is that these gods are very liberal in where they draw the lines. Actually, there are no lines really.
You draw your own lines, but you also get to be superstitious at the same time.
Okay. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? All these superstitions, and one of the things I read was that in the early times, actually the worship of Baal didn't really prescribe the sacrificing of children, but there was some things discovered where it was in archaeological digs where it actually said something like, you don't have to do that, but if you really want to be right, you'll offer an innocent child. You don't have to, but if you really want to impress Baal, just offer an innocent child. So the moral lines were totally obliterated, and that was appealing, I think, to the Israelites because the demand on them by God for so many things and sacrifices and feast days and all of that, and all the law keeping that they were to do. You just really punched your ticket when you followed a false god to be able to do whatever you wanted to. Just anything you wanted to do, you punched that ticket. It has nothing to do with that exactly, but punching the ticket reminded me, 100 years ago, I went to the Walker County Fair, and it was at the old fairgrounds way down past the lumber company, Brakefield. Anyway, down there past Shades Crest Nursing Home, down in there. Nobody in here is old enough to remember that, are they? But I remember as just a baby, I remember that when you paid your entry fee, whatever it was, a dime, I guess, they gave you a certain number of tickets. And then if you wanted to ride anything else, you had to go back and buy more tickets. And for some reason, I don't know if this is true or not, but for some reason the number 6 is imprinted in my mind. So I got to ride 6 rides, or 6 of the same ride, six times. And I was so disappointed when I ran out of tickets. And I think I spent half of them throwing baseballs at that thing that wouldn't fall. So the idea of them punching their ticket to do whatever they wanted to brought that up. So there you go. All right. So one of the things that would be so significant when they looked around them was that the people around them seemed to be prospering, and they wanted to be like that. And that if we can connect ourselves, then we can be like them and be prosperous like them. And we can do that by maybe worshiping our God and their gods too, make them all our gods. It has to do with being morally liberated, being able to go ahead and do what you want to do, being able to indulge yourself, things that were not only pleasing aesthetically, but things that were pleasing in most every other way. Those that would appease all of the lust of the flesh, and so that was appealing. I think there was something too about being able to visualize the God, which is Melissa brought up that the very idea of being able to see and touch and to be able to have that with you, I think was something that persuaded them in that direction as well. So really our lists are pretty much the same, but I think really what it all boils down to is a lack of determination to do the right thing and follow God, no matter what the temptations out there are. See, we struggle in our day and time. There is the same kind of struggle to follow that which is pleasing to the eye, or to do that which would bring us pleasure, or to look for something that's less captivating or less of a struggle, to be a little more liberated in our morality. People, and I don't mean us necessarily, but human beings. We're still looking for that. We still want that kind of guide or leader. We still want that for sure. All right, well, that's just a question. It kind of came across my mind as I was thinking about why in the world did they do this? We spent all this time talking about these Israelites and them doing what they did and carrying on the way they have, and how do you explain it? How is it actually something that we can explain or kind of trace down and find out why they actually did that?
But isn't it sort of in our nature? I mean, right from the beginning, God knew that we were going to be tempted. I mean, we were tempted in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
He said not to eat from that, but they were pleasing to them, and they ate it, they were tempted. So when we're tempted, like you just said, we're in our nature, it's our, and then they were supposed to get rid of all those people when they didn't, so they were tempted. I mean, it was just part of their nature.
Mm-hmm.
Like our nature, to be tempted to do those things.
Yeah. I think we kind of hit all around that, but you said it very well. Beverly.
It's like when you're a child, your parents say you're not going to do that, well, that was the very thing.
Right, yeah. Beverly mentions when you were a child and your parents said, don't do that, you're not going to do that, we're not going to allow that. Well, that's the very thing you wanted.
Usually, sometimes it's because they weren't perfect or never attained the perfection of righteousness that they were trying to achieve. They were always rolling their sins forward. they can never add up to what the law asks them to be. And, you know, so it's easier, if I can't add up, then let me go do the easier.
I don't know, maybe there's some validity to that thought that, you know, they just got tired of trying to every year make things right. Let's go do something that's less constricting. I think I kind of alluded to that a
That's
little bit.
interesting though, because our heroes of faith of the Old Testament are mentioned as looking positively forward
Mm-hmm.
to what God has promised was coming. So if there were some who through a lack of faith couldn't catch on to what God is going to provide and what we're heading forward, then I could certainly see them falling under that weight. If you think, I can't do it,
Mm-hmm.
then you give up. Whereas people like Abraham, okay, God's doing something. Now, I may not see it in my lifetime, but it's coming. He's providing like he provided this ram in the place of my son.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good observation. And see, one of the things that you bring up is this idea of the heroes of the faith that are referred to in the Old Testament. And if it hadn't been Abraham, if it had been someone else, would he have lasted that long? Would he have, because Abraham, even though he had that faith, he kept on asking the question, when and how, and I'm getting all concerned here because it hasn't happened yet, and you have God having to go back and remind him over and over. So if that's somebody else, didn't they throw their hands up when Sarah said, "Come on, take my handmaiden"? So there's a little pause in there. There's this blip in the screen where, you gave up and you quit on me, and so then Abraham's back. So someone else might have given up and gone to the Baal and said, "Hey, Baal, I don't have any sons. Can you help me out?" Baal said, "Yeah, I can help you."
That's the difference in that struggling and working through it versus leaving God for something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, good observation. All right, in the time we have left, let's go back to the book of Judges. I think there's a good place for us to kind of wrap all this up because in Judges chapter 2, they are told not to make any covenant with the people of the land. They've already been given this directive from God to clear the land, to clean the land, to not have any neighbors who will draw them away. And as a result of their disobedience, here you have the nation who's now settled in the land, and Joshua is gone, and now you're in a situation in the leadership where you have no really good leadership. The judges just don't really provide any real good leadership for the nation, and they seem to go down the wrong path here in the book of Judges. So God gave Israel plenty of time during this period of the Judges. Isn't that about 300 years? I remember that right? There's about 300 years here in the period of the Judges. So he gives them plenty of time to work things out. He gives them enough time during the period of the Judges to make right things that have gone wrong. As a matter of fact, you have the judge Gideon. Remember, Gideon's probably one of those very well-known judges. And so you have Gideon who destroys his father's altar to Baal. Go to chapter 6. He destroys his father's altar to Baal. And do you remember what they wanted to do to him because he destroyed the altar of Baal? They weren't happy. They wanted to kill him because he destroyed his father's altar. 6:25. That night the Lord said to him, take your father's bull and the second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of the stronghold here with stones laid in due order. Then take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering in the wood of the Asherah that you shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had told him. But because he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, he did it at night. Then verse 28, when the men of the town rose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was broken down, the Asherah beside it was cut down, the second bull was offered on the altar, had been built, and they said to one another, what is this thing? And they inquired and found out it was Gideon. They wanted to kill him. So, here you go. You have this period of Judges, and it's dominated by this kind of social setting, say religious setting, or however you want to describe it, but you have this, what seems to be a very small step in trying to change the direction of the nation of Israel, as God gives Gideon this instruction, and it's not taken very well. So once this has taken root, it seems like there's just no way that it's going to be taken out. It just seems like there's no way that it's going to be rooted out and totally annihilated, and it's really not. You have this strong, consistent moving back to idolatry by the nation of Israel all the way up until 586 BC. When they're taken into captivity, you remember we looked at, I think it was last week, we looked at even while they're in captivity, they're still worshiping the false gods. But once they come back, they don't do that anymore. Not in this way, but they seem to go a whole different route, which is another series of studies. But I guess, well, you think we tire of reading these faults and failures of the nation of Israel? What do you think about God as He's looking down on them after, century after century, decade after decade, and He looks down and it exasperated because of events like we read here in Joshua chapter 6. Judges chapter 6. So God gave them, God had patience. He gave them time. He was seeking to make them a people who would love Him and serve Him and do His will, and it just seemed like they could never commit to doing that very thing. Yes? Mm-hmm. That's true, and the way that we're seeing our nation turn, we talk about the way that things are different here, but you have other nations still seeking the Lord in great ways. So, yeah, our nation's going to fall. It's going to happen. I mean, it may not happen for a long, long time, but it's going to fall. All nations have. All nations will. It's just not going to remain forever. Look at chapter 3 of Judges, verse 4 specifically. It talks about the Philistines, Canaanites, 5 lords of the Philistines, Canaanites, Sidonians, the Hivites. Verse 4, they were for the testing of Israel, to know whether Israel would obey the commandments of the Lord, which He commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. So the people lived among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. And their daughters they took to themselves for wives, and their own daughters they gave to their sons, and they served their gods. Boy, that confused me when I read that. They remained there for the testing of Israel. Thoughts on that? What'd God say? Get rid of them. But God said, if you don't get rid of them, what's going to happen? They're going to influence you. You're going to marry their daughters, and their sons will marry your daughters, and you're going to be drawn away.
Isn't it the same question as to why that serpent was in the garden in the first place?
I think that's exactly it. I think it is. He's not saying, I let them stay there so that Israel would be tested. He's saying that because they stayed there, the temptation is present because that's what you wanted. Temptation is present. It is there. Well, in chapter 2, let's see. I didn't write the verses down on this one. Well, I guess 1 through 4. I think that's what I was looking at. Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land. You shall break down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you've done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their God shall be a snare to you. As soon as the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the people of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept. And they called the name of that place Bochim, and they sacrificed there to the Lord. I think that word means something like weepers or weeping or something about that very idea. So God says, I was with you. I was giving you victory. I was giving you what you needed, which was the ability to overcome and destroy your enemy. But now that you've stopped doing what I told you to do, and now you're pointing to me to say, well, God, you just drive them out. Why don't you just take them out? He says, no, not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. You didn't do it like I told you to. Now you're suffering the consequences. I find it interesting that the people wept. They even made a monument here at this place, and they named it. And yet, did that mean anything? Did that mean anything? I don't think it meant anything. I don't think that monument meant anything.
But you don't think he did this group?
No.
Okay, but then Joshua died, and they said, and then a next generation came about.
Yeah.
And this generation did not know God.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I'm not sure about how dedicated they were at that point, but
The timeline is interesting, because it does mention the death of Joshua next, but if you back up to the end of the book of Joshua, we mentioned the death of Joshua.
mm-hmm.
When exactly did that angel make that declaration, and how does that fit in with Joshua's declaration at the end of the book, choose whom you will serve? So which generation was he talking to?
Mm-hmm.
And how did that, what was the timeline?
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's almost like chapter 2 backs up all the way to the end of the book to bring that in. All right, so you have this mourning, it seems, over the idolatry that's taking place, the destruction of those first commandments. In chapter, well, you could just name almost any verse in any of these chapters, and you're going to nearly hit on some illustration of how these the people in Judges are totally consumed by idolatry and lack of loyalty to the Lord. So it's quite a story. Actually, chapters 19 through 22 are full of this breaking of the commandments, the violations of the commands. Not just the command of not having any other gods, but the commands of how you treat others. And that's one of the things that's come up, and I wanted to kind of touch on that. I guess this will be, our time will be up. But we touched on it, I think, last week, maybe a couple of different times over the past few weeks. But when there is no dedication to God, one of the things that happens is the lack of commitment to God's rules or laws, and therefore there's going to be a lack of morality, a lack of behavior that's in line with God's Word. So you remove God from the picture and you begin to follow idols. One of the things that's characteristic is that you're not going to be living a righteous life. You're not going to live a good life. And that was one of the things that the prophets would speak to as they would talk about the coming destruction because of their being unwilling to follow God and follow God only. And one of the things they would speak to is the lack of dedication to God and the lack of treating their fellow man in the right kind of way. So you have that over and over, and there seems to be an inseparable connection to that. And so one of the things that would be characteristic of one who leaves God and goes to follow Baal or a false god is that morality is going to be completely lost. Part of that is because the lines are no longer drawn of morality. There are no longer any lines drawn. And another reason is, if I've left God behind, am I just going to take a few of those commandments with me? Well, no. I'm going to leave God. I'm certainly not going to take any of those constricting commandments, because that would keep me from doing some of those things that I would do. So the connection, I think, is inseparable. If you leave God and go to follow false gods, you leave behind the morality that God demands of His people. All right, any observations? We'll conclude with some remarks from you. Nothing?
I think Taylor mentioned too that, they wept and that generation saw them. They didn't teach their children.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking too.
They didn't tell their children.
They knew not their word for what He had done, so that generation failed to teach.
Exactly. Yeah. So whatever they were doing, they obviously did not instruct and guide the next generation.
But they didn't know. They did not know God. They went back to the same routine, that vicious circle.
All right. Thanks for your comments.